We're back with In Your Best Interest. Today is Show Me the Money. It's talk about family support and child support. And if you don't think you're going to be involved in this in some capacity, 55% of the people around you will be. So maybe you'll just get a few tips on how to deal with private school, child support, visitation, all that fun stuff. So kick us off, Mary.
All right. Well, there are a lot of misconceptions about child support, and Texas is also very different than other states, too. So I think we're going to definitely hit on that today. So I'm going to just throw some questions at you, and you're going to throw back some answers. So let's go with number one. What can a parent do if the other parent stops paying child support?
Part of the answer depends on whether the other parent has resources. Okay, so there's the Attorney General, which enforces child support in the state of Texas. And they do that for free. Now, as we know, nothing is free, right? So you're going to be waiting a little bit longer to get that process going rather than going private. You're going to be in a room with a lot of people that are trying to get money paid to them. And then, you're just kind of, they're doing that cattle call. Now, they do a great job with the resources they have of getting through that. And sometimes people don't have any other opportunities or resources to do it themselves. And one of the things Andrea and I have talked a lot about is when you're not getting money, the whole reason you go to court is to get money that you don't have. So it's a very tough position to be in as a mother or father who is supposed to be receiving child support. It's a court order and they don't get it. But the enforcement of the child support, it has a lot of teeth to it. So you file a motion for enforcement of the child support if you have a valid order in the state of Texas, and you go forward, and there's a lot of remedies that the court can give you. But the motion for enforcement of child support itself is the vehicle or the pleading that we use, and that gets everybody to the party to get the spigot turned back on as far as payment. And like I said, the courts have a lot of abilities to do things like suspending licenses, to putting someone in jail. There's a lot of different remedies, and we can talk about that in a bit, but that's the vehicle of how you get there.
But to be honest, like, how strong is that enforcement if I go to the Attorney General's office? I mean, I've been in that situation, and I always felt it was a little slap on the hand, do better, and nothing happens. I had 4 kids. I didn't receive child support. The other party was intentionally unemployed for a long time and then took a piss-poor job to not pay child support because they thought it was mother support instead of child support. And I always felt whenever we went to court, not with you, but when I went to the OAG back then, you had the hearing and then there was nothing. I think there was only one time I felt that they gave a response to him and said, you're old enough and you have 4 kids in this world, so you need to get yourself out there and do a job. So how do I navigate that situation?
Yeah, I think that it's important to remember, too, the timing. Like jails in Tarrant County, for example, if they're really full, it's not just whether they put them in jail. I've seen them put people in jail for the weekends. I've seen them put them in jail for 180 days. I've seen them put them in jail for 180 days and they get out in 20. And so it's like, I would not think that 24 hours or 2 hours in a jail cell would be full. But you're right. A lot of times, it's a situation where somebody is very underemployed, either intentionally or unintentionally because they're just lazy and they don't go get a job. And so mom or dad that's trying to collect or bleed that turnip often feels like there's no recourse. And so they just get these big money judgments stacked and stacked and stacked, and it takes a long time to feel the remedy.
And you can't collect on judgments in Texas. It's very difficult to collect on judgments in Texas.
Well, that's a great segue, because child support is one of the best, honestly, because you have, with that recourse of jail time, suspending licenses, you can't bankrupt or you can't discharge it in bankruptcy. So there's a lot of teeth to it, and attorney's fees can get tacked onto that as well if it's for collection of child support. And so that goes through the OAG's department there, and they log that, and then that amount continues to accumulate interest. So if somebody wants to perhaps get a house or get a car or whatever else, and they've got this child support lien outstanding, it's really hard. A lot of job employers go look at that. So there is recourse now if done properly. But you're right. A lot of times it feels like you go to court, you wait around all day, and then they pass it and they give them a continuance. You come back and then you do it all over again. And that part of it, I think you told me in Germany, they just go pick you up, right?
Yeah, they make you have. I mean, I don't know how it is. I've been gone from there for a long time. But first of all, it's in my personal opinion, the system is better. So I get Kindergeld, which is basically money for kids translated. So I get Kindergeld from the government. Mm-hmm. So if I have 4 kids, I get 4 times, I think, around $250 a month. So as a single mother of 4 kids, that helps to get that. And the father has to pay money, but if they don't, back in the days it was, if you don't work, they're going to find you a job.
Yeah.
And then if you have to clean out sewers and you are a doctor, said I can't find a job, you think about that twice and then you actually find a job. But I think it was easier for me when I was here. I didn't understand because it's you as a person have to fight for the child support. And I appreciated you back then when I came to you saying, is it really worth it going to court? Because you spend a lot of money in court now trying to get child support. And if he's still unemployed or he's still doing those things, you spend the money that you're not going to get back or you're going to get a judgment. Do we really want to pursue that case? And we actually didn't back then. And we just, like you said, timing, we waited. But to me, having been in that situation, I always felt the system is totally broken because you fight an uphill battle as the person not receiving child support. And that's why people end up with 3 or 4 jobs trying to feed their kids because the other party is a dipshit.
Yeah, it's pretty rare, I think, that you see people that have a lot of resources not pay child support. Like it, you see people get behind because just logistically they just don't get the check in. But one of the great things about threatening the enforcement and the teeth that come with that, and the remedies that come with that, is that most people that have resources don't want to go through that process. The other piece to that is, if you've got somebody that legitimately has never worked or they have these like oddball jobs and they're an independent contractor and they pay themselves under the table in cash, that's where it's really hard for me to take a client's money. I'm kind of like, you really want to go probably through the OAG there, because even though they're not going to conduct a discovery and figure out whether this person's hiding cash under a mattress and all that stuff, which by the way, we can't find out. It's really hard to tell a client that we can do something that's above and beyond other than timing, other than the speed and efficiency and the calls and the contact. So if we can't conduct discovery and we can't go show that they have other assets and all that, we're not going to be a huge value other than speed and efficiency.
Right. So a question that often gets asked of your law firm is, why do I have to pay child support if I never get to see my kids?
Or I've got them 45% or 46% of the time. How come I'm paying full boat child support? Child support, literally, I tell people this all the time. I would do about 3 things to the family code that would probably eliminate my need in a lot of scenarios. One of them being a 50-50 kind of arrangement and a true just, what do you make, how much time, and then just put in the calculation so it's all done that way. But our government has decided, the state of Texas has decided to come up with this formula, right? And so, I don't get to see my kids piece, back to your question, they're very part and parcel. You cannot combine those orders. You can't say, if you don't do this, then my remedy is not to give you the kids. It in fact says that in the order. So the courts are very specific about the punishment has to fit the crime and keeping those things very separate, and for good reason. We have due process, meaning we have the right to go to court, and you can argue your position, but you got to have clean hands if you want the court to do something, right? So the last thing you want to do is, you're not going to get to see the kid. And when I see those cases come through, usually we'll file a counter enforcement for the withholding of the child to offset. And then you've got 2 reasons for the court to say, y'all can both go to jail. You better do right? So just food for thought there.
Right. So that kind of answered my next question is, can I withhold visitation if my ex stops?
Hell no.
Child support?
No, don't do that.
You're going to get some big-ass trouble if you do that.
Yeah.
This is a question that a lot of people are asking. How can I get out of paying child support?
So first of all, it's important to remember that child support is not contractual, okay? So you can't just go, hey, I don't want to pay it today, or I don't like the way you're doing things and I'm not going to pay it. So child support's a court order. It's enforceable by what we call contempt of court, meaning you can go to jail, you can have your licenses revoked and all that stuff we talked about earlier. So there's really no way to get out of paying child support that's ordered or obligated. And the bigger piece that most people don't realize is, unless you file a modification of that child support, the cutoff period is the date of filing. So let's say you lose your job or you get injured or whatever else, and you can't pay it. And I know that we're going to get to that in just a minute. You need to remember that the start date that you can modify is the date you file the pleading. It only goes retroactive. Even if you don't get into court for a long time through the OAG, they can only go back to that start date on a modification of an existing order.
But I mean, to me, the question is like, why child support is, again, it's not mother support or dad support. It is child support. So I don't, when we have people call, it's like, what in the world? You put a child in this world, and then now you feel like you don't have to take care of the child and you don't want to pay. I mean, to me, that's always if you have a kid, you have a responsibility, and if you don't take care of your child, like, what person are you? That's for me the much bigger question than. 'Cause
Yeah, I hate this. I mean, I hate the thought here because I've seen it go so many different directions. Obviously, because I've represented both sides of it. The general consensus is if I have 50-50 or a similar amount of time, why am I paying this guideline amount of 20% for one child, 25% for two, 30% for three?
Right.
Why am I paying that net amount? Because I do all this other stuff. I pay for private school. I pay for babysitters that are not covered by child support, by the way. So why am I paying this other piece? And it feels kind of like a tip to somebody that you don't really want to give a tip to, like in a wait staff setting. And you're like, that food wasn't that good, and I'm tired of you. I don't want to pay you anything. And I get that notion, but there's a lot of people out there that say they do a lot of things that they just don't do. They say they do things for kids, and you people out there that may have a child that the other side says, well, I bought diapers. Well, you did that one time.
Exactly.
Right?
And the cost of kids, I mean, like the cost of kids, the older they get, the more they need. So it's not in the child support, if in normal income, right? And in Texas, you'll talk about that, there's a cap too. But if you have kids, the amount of child support you get doesn't even cover the basic stuff.
Oh, no. We all know how. I mean, hell, I went to freaking Smoothie King the other day. It was like $55 for my 3 kids. I'm like, I love when people say, well, it's going to be, this is going to pay for her freight or pay for his freight. I'm like, dude, this doesn't pay for McDonald's for I mean, it's not a game, changer, I don't think. And then as far as, getting it and making sure they're paying it and then going back and filing a mod, you pay lawyers and then all of a sudden they will sue for custody because they're paying you $12 a month or whatever. It just really creates a lot of gasoline on the brush fire. And I know that it has a negative connotation. Last thing I want to say is I hear all the time, well, she's not using this for the kid or he's not using this for the child. I hear that all the time. And what I tell people is, look, if you look at anybody's bank statement and you see how they're living monthly, if she's spending money on her nails, that's $100 less than she has in her account, right? It doesn't matter when she pays for the child or when she doesn't. I can assure you he or she does not have a bunch of surplus. So, stop worrying about earmarking it to the specifics of the child, even though it's called child support. Just think of it as kind of family support.
Right. And I think you kind of touched on something there, too, that certain things are not covered by child support. So the parents pay out of the pocket for that.
Yeah.
So what is child support supposed to cover?
So child support is supposed to cover the reasonable activities of a child, your food, your clothing, hygiene, some school supplies, that. So when we have things called special needs or deviating from what we call the guideline child support, those special needs are above and beyond all of your general day-to-day, okay? Food in your belly, some of the medical support, even that's broken out from uninsured medical or health insurance, what's not covered there. So really it's just kind of an added, hey, take care of the child. This is supposed to, under the census data, be enough to cover the food,
which
clothing,
it doesn't.
and some stuff, right?
It doesn't.
We all
it
know
doesn't, and it doesn't cover if you have more than one kid, you have to have a bigger place, whether it's an apartment or a house, electricity and water and what else. And then if they have any activities, anything outside school that's not covered by school. You talk about private school, but outside of school, that is not. My boys played football. And I ended up being the one paying for every little thing they needed. And I have twins, so that is expensive. There's nothing covered under child support and would not cover.
Well, I just want to go to a quick little thing on that cap. So the cap in child support in Texas, for example, if you make $20 or $30 million, it treats it as if you make $9,300-ish a month. And then you apply the percentage towards that.
So explain that. I think a lot of people don't understand it.
Yeah, so if you have one child, it's 20% of net resources, two kids. We'll just take 2 kids.
So you would think of somebody like an athlete, for example, that makes whatever, 20 million
Yeah, I got
a month.
one right now.
Okay, so they make 20 million a month. So you would think as a wife or whatever, baby mama or baby daddy, doesn't matter, the other way around too.
Yeah.
So I get 20% of the net resources, but that's not the case in Texas.
20% of net resources. The cap is that person makes $9,300 a month,
which we
now,
never lived on when we were married. We never lived on $9,000 a month.
No. And what I'm getting at is $9,300 is like you make let's say you make $1 million a month, which I've had clients that get close to that. The statute treats it as if they make $9,300 a month, and then you multiply the percentage of the number of kids times that. So 20% for one, 25% for two. Let's just stop there. So it's 20% of $9,300 when they're making $1 million a month.
Right.
That's crazy to me. By the same token, I just had a great talk with this fire chief yesterday, and he makes right at the threshold, right at $120,000 a year. And I know there's people that like, dude, these are crazy. We make not that, and I get it. The $9,300 a month really impacts the person that is right at the $10,000 a month, because it's pulling about literally 25 to 30% of their actual income. And the statute, the regulators that made these statutes, they don't go back but every 4 or 5 years to do this census data. So like in my career, I think I've seen the floor or the ceiling for the cap changed twice maybe in 15 years.
We changed it.
And it's like $1,000. I'm like, dude, the inflation, if you just take the inflation data, there's no way you can say that $1,000 difference on a cap on guidelines is correlates to
the inflation,
what the total amount
right
of pay
now. I mean, look at the cost of food and stuff right now. Yeah, look at that. So.
And that's why I think, like, if you give expenses and they're reasonable, and a lot of those are earmarked for the child, and let's say you back out one parent and you look at availability and equality of resources in both households, I think there's a better way to approach that. And I really hope that judges keep an open mind. They do certainly in the temporary phase of the case, but they're really confined by what the statute says when you get post. And so these modifications where you have the athlete, it's really challenging when you have, single mom just kind of going through life, or, single dad just, barely making it, and mom's remarried, she's got millions of dollars, or whatever the case.
So there's a question about the remarried. So does anything happen to child support? So if I get divorced and I get child support and then I remarry, and now I marry whatever, a musician, and like you said, millions of dollars. So does the child support now stop because I have better resources, or?
This one pisses me off too. I mean, it really does, because
bring it, Justin.
If you like, I've got clients that have remarried, and they're not stay-at-home mom. They're just literally like stay-at-home person, right? And they don't do anything, but their spouse makes millions of dollars, and my client has custody of the child. Okay, and they go, well, I make the statutory minimum, which if you think the maximum is bad, the minimum is real bad. Mm-hmm. So in that circumstance, we try to show the resources and availability of resources, but the court's not supposed to consider someone else's income.
New wife or husband. Yeah.
They look at you, right? Now they can look at, whether you're getting a bunch of money each month and you're spending a bunch of money each month, and there can be some attributed income, specifically if you had a job before, now you don't. They can recalibrate a little bit, but we don't see a lot of that. And it's BS in my mind. It really is.
Okay, so you touched on this earlier. So what happens in terms of a modification? Say you lost your job and you're not making any money, or you have a situation where your ex, they're making a whole lot more money than they were. So how do you go about adjusting that child support?
So I'm going to call out the OAG here, and I don't care if you get mad. In my mind, one of the things that's really frustrating is I've got clients that have ample resources that absolutely need no intervention by the OAG, meaning that they come in and file into a case where clients are clearly able to pay for their own lawyers. And they get in there and they do their calculations. And I know there's state money and budgets and all that stuff that we have to deal with, but it does not make sense to me when you have two private attorneys that are fully capable of handling it to have a state government paid attorney in there to, I guess, help us multiply times 0.20 and 0.25. And we already have these calculations already done. It makes no sense to me. So, Andrea, and she brought up a good example. She waited. How long did you have to wait for them to even respond to you?
I don't remember.
And then I had another one where they're like, the guy's in arrears like $1,000, and I'm representing the guy, and we're just literally, he changed jobs, so we're paying it direct.
Do you know how much my arrears up to this day? Over $40,000. And I have judgments and I have everything, and there's nothing happening.
Well, I mean, that's the bleed a turnip argument, right? I mean, it really, it's not the state of Texas is judgment proof. That a lot of people have that connotation when it's a judgment. And child support, you have stronger teeth to it. But what are you going to do if he's making or she's making the payments or minimum payments, and they choose to just keep racking up this interest till the cows come home, that's oftentimes what happens when that arrearage gets that bad.
And they put everything, in my case, they put everything else, the house, the cars, everything else in the wife's name. And we talked earlier,
Yeah.
but if remarried, doesn't matter. So he has nothing to his name, doesn't pay child support. Now the kids are all over 20 and they're still $40,000. And yes, how do you collect on a judgment? That's not that easy. Then you have to spend lawyer fees, or you have to spend hours and hours and hours in figuring out how to do this. So it's that, to me, that I always say, like, not that Germany is better, but I've always felt better. Like, if we would just pay the mother or the father that Kindergeld, that support, so that they have at least something coming in. Because I personally, that's my personal opinion, think that we have so many issues with single parents and people working 2 or 3 jobs and the kids not being home by themselves, because you have to provide for your kids. And if the other person is not doing it, if you have a lot of money to him, great. But if you're not in that situation, or you've been a stay-home mom for a long time, and now be home, stay-home mom for 15 years and raise the kids, and now you're getting divorced, and now you have to put yourself back out there and find a job. You're not going to find a fantastic job and make 6 figures right away, and you're providing for your kids, it's not going to be enough. So you work 2 or 3 jobs, the kids are with babysitters, with grandmother, whoever, and you stand on top of them, you're supposed to fight the other party who might live nice for child support. That's, to me, the system is totally broken there.
No, and I definitely think that, to that point, there's bums out there, moms and dads, that just literally try to hide their money. And, I see people all the time, they go start a lawn care business, for example, and it's in the wife's name. All the equipment's in the wife's name. The pay comes from the wife to her husband, and obviously they go spend on wife's credit card, and wife pays that. It's very hard to compartmentalize that if you don't have a good benchmark. So if somebody if they were making $100,000 and all of a sudden they're making zero, right? You really need that disconnect to go prove that they're intentionally underemployed. But our firms use some creative ways too. When we have, wife as the employer, I'll go put a wage withholding on her and make her withhold for the husband's amounts and things like that. And if she doesn't, we fine her $500 just like we would every time, just like we would a corporation. And over time, what you see is if somebody's really trying to go get a house, that's why I say you got to look at the stages of the case and where the client is in life. Because if you're at retirement age and they've already got their house and they've already got their car and they've already got their credit cards and all this other stuff, they don't give a damn about their credit. So the child support racking up and being out there, they can lose passports and all kinds of things. They may not even travel, right? So, some of these aspects that to me would be like catastrophic. I would hate to lose my driver's license. I would hate to lose my freedom. I would hate to have a child support judgment. I couldn't go get a job. But if you're in a different stage of life, some people just don't care.
Don't care,
and
exactly.
I can't, or we can't do anything as an attorney to fix people that just don't give a damn. And we have people that don't care about jail. They like it. They want a free meal or something. I'm like, what?
God.
Or they just wanted, they're so venomous that they're like, I don't want to give her a damn dime. I don't care if I go to jail. I don't care what happens to me. And, you can't shoot them.
Pick the better father for your kids or mother for your kids.
Yeah, just don't pick those. And that is a good point, though. Don't go, just messing around with somebody you don't know. Because these things are real. I've seen people in very successful situations end up with somebody that they thought was not the person they thought, and they are spending their life
trying to fix
that. So it's food for thought.
So let's just touch a little bit on the modifications, though. So if someone is earning less, or so if you have a client that comes in and is like, say, hey, I lost my job. Kind of what that process is. Because again, it's important to point out that date is important that you file to change what that order is.
That's right. No, and that the question that you just asked is really important for people to remember. If you lose your job, you really cannot wait. I'm not being rude to the OAG. I know it sounds like I'm just beating up on them. But you cannot wait for them to go file a proactive pleading to modify your child support downward, okay? They sometimes will do it. I don't even know if I've seen a whole lot of situations where they actually go in and do that very often. I've got a lot of clients that come in and say, hey, I contacted the OAG 9 months ago and I haven't heard back.
I have it too.
And I've lost my job. Like, what do I do? I can't work. I physically can't work. Mm-hmm. They had an injury or whatever. And this interest and child support just keeps racking up on them. So it's really important. I don't care if you have to hire Joe Schmo or if you have to go online and just look at how do I file a modification. Mm-hmm. And even if it sucks and you completely screw it up, that deadline of filing it, if you can't afford to hire counsel, is critical. And you can't wait because those bills rack up, right? And all the things are still going on in life, including the child support with the interest. So it's just really important to do that.
Let's see. My ex just got a big promotion and is earning a lot more money. Can I ask for more child support?
Oh, well, again, circumstance. I've got a client yesterday. She called me. She goes, well, I moved to Florida. She's not a client yet. And by the way, when we share these examples,
The state and person is often
yeah,
wrong.
there's so many of these examples. Don't think we're just out here sharing your business, but there's so many of these examples. So I could literally say we have a client yesterday, and I had 50 more of those 2 months ago, right? So we're not trying to put your business on the street. But that said, she moved to Florida, and she's got the child in private school, and she's moved off with her boyfriend. They got divorced. Her and her husband got divorced. Kids are older. And dad is making a lot more money, but he's got child A living with him now, the oldest, and she's got child B, the youngest, living with her in Florida, going to private school. And so she's like, hey, can I go back for child support? Well, the answer is yes, of course. You can go back if there's a deviation in the child support, if it's been 3 years, if there's a deviation of $100 more or 100% from the last entry. There's statutory ways to get back in the door just without having to go and show. But most people don't know what the other party's making when they get separated or divorced, and they have no idea. So the statute says, well, okay, if it's been 3 years, we can come back and take an automatic look. If you know they took a job and they're making a bunch more money, we can take an automatic look if it's over that threshold percentage. So you got to be smart about it, though, because in that case, the child is living there. She's getting income off of a trust stock, and this is probably too much information, but she's getting income off the trust stock. Having child A over here and child B over here
Changes
offsets a lot of times, right? So if you just go tell a client, hey, go fire off a modification of child support, that offset actually was to her detriment. And she's getting more money in child support now than she would if you go fire off that bullet. So it's really important to analyze it and think about it and look at the circumstance. She goes, well, what about the private school? I'm paying for the private school. Courts are like, we can't force a kid or somebody to pay for private school. We don't get to do that. That's your choice. And so there's a lot of things that courts just won't really consider that seem very natural for them to consider: babysitting, childcare, private school. If it's not a reasonable need and it's not in excess of that reasonable need, you're going to have a problem getting a court to deviate from the guidelines.
So, and he just said other states. So how does it work with other states? Because if they are allowed, or they've never been married and there's no restrictions or whatever, and they move to another state, is there still enforceability in another state, or is it? Can you just do people think? Because I heard that before too. I just moved to another state, and then the Texas OAG will not find me, and they will not.
No. You can't hide from our government. They're very good about finding you, unless you just don't like the United States and you can move out like some people are doing. But realistically, state by state. So if one party is still in the state of Texas and the other party relocates to another state, it's called a long arm statute. The state that the other party is in can enforce the child support in the other state, but they're going to communicate through the OAG here, and the OAG here is actually going to enforce it on their side in the state that you're in.
OAGs work together.
So unless the whole case transfers to the other state, you're generally going to be litigating the enforcement inside of the state, but you can do it in another state.
Okay.
It's kind of confusing, but it is the way it is. Now, you're going to also operate under the state's laws that the order is until it's transferred to the other state. So you might move to, Piedmont, North Dakota, and they might, say, well, we'll chop off their arms or whatever they say they're going to do. You don't get to utilize their laws just because they're harsher until you transfer the whole case.
Okay. So that's we're kind of getting towards the close here, but I'm sure there's some other examples of child support issues that you and the firm face frequently. Is there anything else that comes to mind before we wrap up today?
Yeah, I like to think about family support too. So when we talk about contractual things like paying for private school, room, board, tuition, college expenses, those are contractual terms, okay? And it's really important to separate. Again, child support is not a contract. So when you put those contractual provisions in, what Andrea was saying earlier, a lot of people are judgment proof in Texas, meaning they have their house, their homestead exemption, they have some retirement exemption, they have $60,000 in personal property exemption, their motor vehicle. So it feels like you can't go get them and attach that judgment. And it's really spot on a lot of times. So be thinking if you can move the needle up in child support, be thinking about that because it's got some tighter parameters around enforceability. But also the other side of that argument is child support's modifiable because it's not a contract. Okay. So if somebody decides, hey, I'm going to lock into this $1,500 a month, I'm making X, Y, and Z amount. I don't put that amount in the order. And now I want to go back 2 years later and modify downwards. We see people do that a lot too.
So what the contractual piece, is that enforceable now? So if we agree in a divorce decree, for example, that we share 50-50 on a private school, if one party decides, no, I don't want to, then they have to modify the order? Is that
they
enforceable?
can't. So a contract, you're not going to be able to go back and modify the contract. That's why I was saying you need to understand the difference of the two, because the contract you're not going to be able to go back and modify. And you need to get real specific if you're putting things on paper like room, board, tuition. There's a cap on that and what that entails, the school they're presently in, at the amount they're looking at. You need to think about that: who, what, when, where, why. I've got a horror story about a client that stuck her kid. The other side, she was the mother. My client was the father. This lady went and put her kid in this dressage, which is some fancy horse thing, which is beautiful, by the way. But this dressage thing was astronomically expensive, and the dad was going to be responsible for all extracurriculars, and the lawyer didn't go including but limited to this and an amount.
Wow.
And so she goes and sticks him in, and I'm like, there's no way in hell the court's going to make my guy pay for this $60,000 a year school and this dressage lessons and all this crap. But the order was very vague, and for a while they did. It took us a while to be able to get away from that, and you don't want to be in that situation either.
So you advise then, though, when you have kids, that you put in your divorce decree anything that is not covered by child support? Would you advise? I mean, like at college, child support stops when the kid turns 18 or leaves high school, right? So then that ends. But most kids go to college. So you should put that into your divorce decree. Because, I mean, you don't know how, whatever, if the kid is 5, you don't know how you guys are going to get along, whatever, 15 years from now or 13 years from now. So what is your suggestion in a case like that?
Yeah, it depends on whether it's a divorce case or whether it's a SAPSR or suit affecting parent-child relationship, which is just a custody case without a divorce. So in a divorce case, I may use that as a tool to negotiate a valuation versus a value of an estate versus, a situation where if you're just in a custody case and we know that a party's willing to pay for college, if I'm representing one party that's getting all the benefit of that, of course it's worth it. But if I'm locking two parties in by contract and one party over here is a deadbeat and they're not paying for stuff, the last thing I want to do is obligate my side of the pie or my client to paying half the expenses, which they're probably going to do anyway. The other thing to think about there too is the one thing that I will always say is when kids get older, all you get is basically, as far as discipline, is using money, iPhones, cars, college tuition. You need to be able to use those things as a check and balance on your kid if they decide to be a turd, right? And sometimes these kids, especially if mommy or daddy is like giving them all the things they want and telling them all the things they need to hear, and our client's the disciplinarian, now all of a sudden you're binding a person who is doing the right thing discipline-wise to pay for a child that's being a turd. And I don't like that.
That's true.
So I don't like overextending a lot of obligations in writing. Just do it out of the grace of your heart if you want to, but there are exceptions to that rule.
Okay.
All right. Any other final thoughts on child support today?
No, just raise happy babies.
Yes. Well, I know people will have a lot of other questions about child support, and that's when they should come see you at the Sizemore Law Firm if they live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And to do that, you can call 817-336-4444 or visit lawyerdfw.com. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great day.